The wind howled like a dying animal across the frozen plains of Colorado Territory, and Jane Phillips could no longer feel her fingers wrapped around the leather reins of her mare. It had been 3 years since she buried her husband Thomas in the hard earth outside Pueblo. 3 years of running their small cattle operation alone with nothing but grit and determination to keep her going. She was 26 now, weathered beyond her years by grief and hard work, but still possessed of the fierce independence that had drawn Thomas to her in the first place. Today, that independence might be the death of her. She had ridden out that morning to check on the herd despite the threatening sky, ignoring old Samuel's warnings about the storm rolling down from the mountains. Now she was paying for her stubbornness with frozen tears on her cheeks and a disorientation so complete she could not tell north from south. The blizzard had come on fast, swallowing the world in white fury. Jane had tried to retrace her path back to the ranch, but within minutes every landmark had vanished. The wind drove snow into her face like tiny needles, and her horse stumbled beneath her, exhausted and confused. She knew the stories of people found frozen mere yards from safety, their bodies stiff and blue when spring came. The thought terrified her, but more than that, it made her angry. She had survived too much to die alone in the snow like some fool tenderfoot fresh off the train. Her mare whinnied and tried to turn away from the wind, but Jane pulled her back on what she hoped was the right course. The cold was stealing her thoughts now, making everything fuzzy and distant. She found herself thinking of Thomas, of the way he used to warm her feet between his hands on winter nights, and for a moment she almost felt warm again. That scared her worse than the cold. She knew what warmth meant in a blizzard. It meant the end. "No," she said aloud, though the wind snatched the word away. "Not yet, not like this." But the white wall before her offered no answer, no mercy, no hope. Her mare stumbled again, nearly going down, and Jane felt her own strength failing. Maybe she should stop, she thought. Maybe she should find some shelter, wait it out. But there was no shelter on these open plains, nothing but grass and snow and the killing wind. To stop was to die. She was about to give up, to let the horse have its head and hope the animal's instincts were better than her own failing judgment, when a shape materialized from the white curtain ahead. At first, she thought it was a trick of the storm, a hallucination brought on by cold and desperation. But then the shape became a man on a horse, solid and real, moving toward her with purpose. "Hello," she tried to shout, but her voice came out as barely a whisper. The rider must have seen her anyway, because he urged his horse forward and within moments was beside her. He was a tall man, bundled in a heavy coat and wide-brimmed hat, his face wrapped in a scarf that left only his eyes visible. Those eyes were a startling blue even in the gray light of the storm, and they took her in with a single efficient glance that assessed everything. "You are lost," he said. It was not a question. Jane tried to answer but found her jaw too stiff with cold to form words properly. She managed a nod. The man reached out and took her mare's reins from her frozen fingers. "You are with me now," he said, his voice carrying clearly despite the wind. "You are never lost with me." There was such certainty in his words, such absolute confidence, that Jane felt something in her chest unclench for the first time since the storm had closed around her. She did not know this man, had no reason to trust him, but in that moment she believed him completely. He turned his horse, keeping hold of her reins, and started back the way he had come. Jane tried to pay attention to their direction, to memorize the route, but the cold had sunk too deep into her bones. She simply held on and let him lead, trusting this stranger with her life because she had no other choice. They rode for what felt like hours but was probably only minutes. The man never hesitated, never paused to check his bearings. He moved through the blizzard as if he could see through it, as if he carried a map in his head that the storm could not obscure. Jane watched him through heavy-lidded eyes, marveling at his confidence, and wondered who he was. When the dark bulk of a building suddenly appeared before them, Jane actually gasped. It was a cabin, small but solid, with smoke rising from a stone chimney. The man guided both horses to a lean-to shelter on the side of the structure, where they would be protected from the worst of the wind. "Can you dismount?" he asked, turning to her. Jane tried, but her frozen legs would not obey her. She felt herself starting to fall, and then his hands were there, catching her, lowering her carefully to the ground. Her legs buckled, and he kept one arm around her waist, supporting her weight easily. "Inside," he said, and half carried her to the cabin door. The warmth that hit her face when he pushed the door open was almost painful. Her skin prickled and burned as sensation began returning. The man guided her to a chair near the fireplace and went back out into the storm, returning moments later with his saddlebags and hers. He secured the door against the wind, then came to kneel before her. "Your boots," he said, reaching for her feet. "I can do it," Jane protested, but her hands would not cooperate. "Let me help," he said gently, and began unlacing her frozen boots. Jane watched him work, too exhausted to protest further. As he removed her boots and then her wet stockings, she got her first good look at him. He had unwrapped the scarf from his face, revealing strong features bronzed by wind and sun. He looked to be in his early 30s, with dark hair just starting to show gray at the temples, and those remarkable blue eyes that seemed to see everything. There was a steadiness to him, a quiet competence that made her feel safe even though she knew nothing about him. "My name is Nathan Foster," he said, gently rubbing her feet to restore circulation. "This is my line cabin. You are safe here." "Jane Phillips," she managed through chattering teeth. "My ranch is 5 miles south of Pueblo. I was checking the herd when the storm hit." Nathan nodded, unsurprised. "I was riding the line when I saw you. Lucky I did. You would not have lasted another hour out there." Jane knew he was right. "Thank you," she said. "You saved my life." "No thanks needed," Nathan said, still working on her feet. "This country is hard enough without letting folks freeze to death." He brought her a blanket and a cup of coffee from the pot that had been warming by the fire. Jane wrapped herself in the blanket and sipped the hot liquid, feeling it burn all the way down. Slowly, painfully, warmth began to seep back into her body. Nathan tended to the horses, bringing them inside the lean-to properly and making sure they had feed and water. When he came back in, he was covered in snow that melted quickly in the cabin's heat. He shrugged out of his heavy coat and hung it by the door, then checked the fire and added more wood. "The storm will likely last through the night," he said. "Maybe longer. We will be here a while." "You live here?" Jane asked, looking around the small cabin. It was sparse but well-maintained, with a bunk along one wall, a small table and chairs, shelves with supplies, and the fireplace that was the heart of everything. "I stay here when I am working this section of the range," Nathan explained. "I am the foreman for the Ramirez Ranch. We run cattle from here to the mountains. This time of year I ride the line, check for breaks in the fence, look for strays." "That is a lonely job," Jane observed. Nathan shrugged. "I prefer it to being in town. Too many people, too much noise. Out here things are simple." "Simple," Jane repeated with a tired laugh, "until a blizzard comes up and tries to kill you." "Even that is simple," Nathan said. "The land does not pretend to be something it is not. It is hard and it is honest. I respect that." Jane studied him over the rim of her coffee cup. There was something about him, a quality she could not quite name. He moved with the economy of someone comfortable in his own skin, spoke with the directness of someone who had no patience for nonsense. She liked it. "You are a widow," Nathan said, and Jane's eyes widened in surprise. "How did you know?" He gestured to her left hand, where her gold wedding band still circled her finger. "You wear a ring, but you run your ranch alone. Either you are widowed or your husband is a fool. Since you are out here in a blizzard checking your own herd, I am guessing widow." 3 years now," Jane said quietly. "Thomas was killed by a runaway horse, broke his neck. I am sorry." "Thank you." Jane took another sip of coffee. "What about you?" "Does the lonely foreman have a wife somewhere?" "No," Nathan said. "I was married once long ago. She died of cholera our first year together. I was 22. Never found the inclination to try again." "I am sorry," Jane echoed his words. They fell silent, watching the fire. Outside, the wind continued to scream, rattling the cabin's shutters. Jane felt exhaustion pulling at her, but she was reluctant to give in to it. There was something comforting about sitting here with this stranger, sharing the warmth and the quiet companionship. "You should rest," Nathan said after a while. "Take the bunk. I will sit up and keep the fire going." "I cannot take your bed," Jane protested. "You nearly froze to death. You need proper rest. I am used to sleeping rough. The floor by the fire is fine for me." Jane wanted to argue, but she could barely keep her eyes open. "Just for a few hours," she conceded, moving to the bunk. She lay down, still wrapped in the blanket, and was asleep almost instantly. She did not wake until morning, when pale gray light was filtering through the shutters and the smell of bacon filled the cabin. She sat up, disoriented for a moment, then remembered everything. Nathan was at the stove cooking breakfast. He looked over when he heard her stir. "Good morning." "How do you feel?" "Sore," Jane admitted, "but alive. The storm, still going strong. We will be here another day at least." Jane stood, testing her legs. They held, though she was stiff and her feet were tender. She moved to the window and peered through a gap in the shutters. The world outside was a white void, the snow falling so thickly she could barely see the lean-to just yards away. "I have never seen anything like this," she murmured. "The worst storm in 5 years," Nathan said. "But this cabin has weathered worse. We have plenty of supplies. We will be fine." He served breakfast and they ate together at the small table. The bacon was crisp, the biscuits he had made surprisingly light. Jane ate hungrily, her appetite returning with her warmth. "You are a good cook," she said. "A man who rides the line learns to cook or starves," Nathan replied. "I prefer not to starve." Jane laughed, surprised by how easy it was. She had not laughed much in the 3 years since Thomas died. There had been too much work, too much grief, too much loneliness. But something about Nathan's dry humor got through her defenses. They spent the day talking, sharing stories of their lives. Nathan had been born in Kansas, the son of farmers who had lost everything in a drought. He had gone west at 18, worked as a cowhand, learned the cattle business from the ground up. He had been foreman for the Ramirez family for 5 years now, and they trusted him to run their operation as he saw fit. Jane told him about growing up in St. Louis, the daughter of a merchant who had never understood her restless spirit. She had met Thomas at a church social, had fallen in love with his dreams of starting a ranch out west. They had married and moved to Colorado Territory, bought a small spread with money from her father, and started building something. Then Thomas died and she had been left to finish what they started alone. "It is hard work for a woman alone," Nathan observed. "It is hard work for anyone," Jane corrected. "But yes, there are challenges. Men do not want to take orders from a woman. They assume I do not know what I am doing. I have to prove myself over and over. That must be frustrating." "It is infuriating," Jane said frankly, "but I am not giving up. Thomas and I built that ranch together. I am not going to let it fail just because he is gone." Nathan nodded slowly. "You have spirit, that is good. You will need it." As the day wore on, Jane found herself relaxing in ways she had not in years. There was something comfortable about Nathan's presence, something solid and dependable. He did not try to impress her or dominate the conversation. He simply was, and that was enough. That night, she insisted he take the bunk while she slept by the fire. They argued about it good-naturedly before finally agreeing to take turns. Nathan took the first shift sleeping while Jane kept watch on the fire. She sat in the chair, wrapped in blankets, watching the flames dance and listening to the steady rhythm of Nathan's breathing. She found herself studying him as he slept, noting the lines around his eyes, the scars on his hands, the way his face relaxed in sleep. He was handsome in a weathered way, she thought, and then felt guilty for thinking it. Thomas had only been gone 3 years. Was it too soon to notice another man? But what was she noticing, really? Nathan had saved her life, had shared his shelter, had been kind and respectful. That was all. When the storm ended, she would go back to her ranch and he would go back to riding the line. They would probably never see each other again. The thought saddened her more than it should have. The next morning the wind had finally died, though snow still fell in lazy drifts. Nathan went out to check on the horses and came back with good news. "The worst has passed. By afternoon we should be able to travel. I will see you back to your ranch." "You do not have to do that," Jane said. "You have done enough already." "I am not letting you ride alone," Nathan said firmly. "Not after pulling you out of one blizzard. I will see you home safely." Jane wanted to argue on principle, but truthfully she was grateful. The thought of riding alone through the snow-covered plains, trying to find her way home, filled her with dread. They left after midday, when the snow had stopped and the clouds were starting to break. The world was transformed, buried under 3 feet of fresh powder that sparkled in the emerging sunlight. Nathan led the way, his horse breaking trail while Jane's mare followed in the packed snow. They rode in comfortable silence, both scanning the landscape for landmarks. Jane was shocked by how different everything looked under its white blanket. She would never have found her way home alone. It took 4 hours of hard riding before Jane finally recognized the distinctive shape of the butte that marked the northern boundary of her land. Relief flooded through her. "There," she said, pointing. "That is my marker." Nathan nodded and adjusted their course. Soon Jane could see the buildings of her ranch. The house Thomas had built with his own hands, the barn, the corrals, all of it looking small and lonely against the vast white expanse. As they approached, an old man emerged from the barn, shielding his eyes against the glare. When he recognized Jane, his weathered face split in a huge grin. "Miss Jane," Samuel called out, hurrying toward them as fast as his stiff legs would carry him. "Thank God, we thought you were lost in the storm." "I was," Jane said, dismounting. "This is Nathan Foster. He found me and gave me shelter." "Nathan, this is Samuel Wright. He has worked here since Thomas and I first bought the place." The 2 men shook hands, Samuel pumping Nathan's arm enthusiastically. "I cannot thank you enough, Mr. Foster. When that storm hit and Miss Jane was not back, I was beside myself with worry. Too old to go out looking myself, and the 2 hands we have were already out trying to round up the cattle before it got too bad." "Your herd?" Jane asked, suddenly worried. "Some scattered, but nothing too bad." "The boys are still out gathering them. They should be back by nightfall." Jane felt tension she had not known she was carrying ease from her shoulders. "That is good news." "You come inside, both of you," Samuel insisted. "Get warm, get some proper food, you must be exhausted." The ranch house was small but cozy, with a main room that served as kitchen and living area, 2 small bedrooms, and a loft where Samuel slept. Jane lit the stove and started coffee while Samuel fussed over them both, clearly delighted to have his employer back safe. Nathan was quiet, looking around the house with an appraising eye. Jane wondered what he thought of her home. It was modest compared to what the Ramirez family probably had, but it was hers and she was proud of it. "You have a good setup here," Nathan said, as if reading her thoughts. "Small but efficient. Good water, a well that never runs dry and a creek that runs most of the year," Jane confirmed. "We have about 200 head of cattle, good grazing land, and enough hay put by to get through the winter. Not bad for a small operation." "It is not much," Jane said, "but it is home." Samuel served them a hot meal of stew he had been keeping warm, and they ate gratefully. Afterward, Nathan rose to leave. "I should get back," he said. "I have been gone 2 days already. My boss will be wondering." "Stay the night," Jane found herself saying. "It will be dark soon, and you have already ridden hard today. Leave fresh in the morning." Nathan hesitated, and Jane could see him considering it. Finally, he nodded. "If you are sure, I do not want to impose. After what you did for me." "It is no imposition." Samuel showed Nathan where he could bed down in the barn, and Jane watched from the window as the two men walked across the snow-covered yard. She felt a strange reluctance to see Nathan go, even just to the barn for the night. That evening, after Samuel had gone up to the loft and the ranch hands had returned with most of the scattered cattle, Jane sat alone by her fire and thought about the last 2 days. She kept seeing Nathan's blue eyes, kept hearing his voice saying, "You are never lost with me." Those words had burrowed into her heart somehow, making a home there. She tried to tell herself it was just gratitude, natural affection for someone who had saved her life. But she knew it was more than that. There had been a connection between them in that cabin, something that went beyond circumstance. She had felt comfortable with Nathan in a way she had not felt with anyone since Thomas died. But what could come of it? He had his job, his life. She had her ranch. They lived in different worlds, even if those worlds were only separated by a few dozen miles of prairie. Jane was still sitting there, staring into the fire when a knock came at the door. She opened it to find Nathan standing there, hat in hand. "I am sorry to disturb you," he said. "I saw your light still on, and I wanted to thank you properly before I leave in the morning, for your hospitality." "You are thanking me," Jane said incredulously. "Nathan, you saved my life." "You have been kind," he insisted. "That matters." They stood there in the doorway, looking at each other, and Jane felt something shift in the air between them. It was the same feeling she had had in the cabin, that sense of connection, of recognition. "Would you like to come in?" she asked. "Have some coffee?" Nathan should have said no. It was late. It was improper for him to be alone with her in her house at night. But instead he said, "Yes, thank you." Jane poured coffee and they sat at her small table, talking quietly so as not to wake Samuel. The conversation flowed easily, comfortably, and Jane realized she had been lonely in ways she had not let herself acknowledge. It was not just the lack of Thomas, though she missed her husband terribly. It was the lack of adult conversation, of connection, of someone who understood the life she had chosen. "You ever regret it?" Nathan asked. Staying here alone, taking on all this responsibility, Jane considered the question. "Sometimes," she admitted. "When the work is hard and the money is tight and I wonder what I am doing it all for. But then I remember that Thomas and I built this together. It was our dream. I am not ready to give up on that dream, even if he is not here to share it anymore." "That is admirable," Nathan said. "Most women would have sold out and gone back east." "I am not most women," Jane said with a small smile. "No," Nathan agreed, his blue eyes serious. "You are not." There was a weight to his words, a meaning beyond the surface, and Jane felt her breath catch. She was suddenly very aware that they were alone, that he was sitting close enough to touch, that she wanted him to touch her. The thought startled her. She had not felt desire for anyone since Thomas had not imagined she would. Grief had numbed her in ways she had not fully understood. But now, looking at Nathan, she felt very much alive. "I should go," Nathan said, but he did not move. "Yes," Jane agreed, but she did not want him to. They sat there a moment longer, the air between them charged with possibility. Then Nathan stood and the spell was broken. "Good night, Jane," he said softly. "Good night, Nathan." She watched him walk back to the barn, and then she closed the door and leaned against it, her heart pounding. What was happening to her? This man had been in her life for 2 days. 2 days. It was absurd to feel this way. But feel it she did. The next morning dawned clear and cold, the sky a brilliant blue after the storm. Jane was up early making breakfast when Nathan came in from the barn. "Morning," he said, and Jane's heart did a stupid little flip at the sight of him. "Good morning. Coffee, please." They ate breakfast with Samuel and the 2 ranch hands, Jim and Tom, who were young men barely out of their teens but good workers. The conversation was general, talk of the storm and the cattle and the work that needed doing. But Jane was intensely aware of Nathan sitting across from her, of every glance, every word. After breakfast, Nathan prepared to leave. He saddled his horse while Jane watched, trying to think of something to say, some way to ask him to stay in her life without sounding desperate or foolish. "Well," Nathan said, swinging into the saddle, "I suppose this is goodbye." "I suppose so," Jane said, hating how formal they suddenly sounded. "Thank you again, Nathan, for everything." "No thanks needed." He paused, looking down at her, and Jane saw something flicker across his face. Regret. Longing. She could not tell. "You take care of yourself, Jane Phillips. You too, Nathan Foster." He touched his hat and turned his horse, and Jane watched him ride away across the white plain. She stood there long after he had disappeared from view, feeling hollowed out in a way that made no sense. "He is a good man," Samuel said, coming to stand beside her. "Yes," Jane agreed quietly. "Shame he is leaving." Jane looked at the old man sharply. Samuel's weathered face was carefully neutral, but his eyes twinkled with mischief. "Samuel, do not start." "I am not starting anything, Miss Jane, just observing. I have not seen you smile like you did at breakfast in 3 years. He saved my life. Of course I am grateful." "That is all it is, then. Gratitude?" Jane wanted to say yes, to brush off the comment and get back to work. But Samuel had been with her and Thomas from the beginning. He had held her while she cried after the funeral, had kept the ranch running when grief made her useless. He deserved honesty. "I do not know," she said finally. "I liked him, Samuel, really liked him, but he is gone now back to his life, and I have mine." "Lives can change," Samuel said, "if people want them to." Jane did not answer. She just turned and walked back to the house, trying to ignore the ache in her chest. The days that followed were busy. The cattle needed constant care after the blizzard, and there was damage to the fences that had to be repaired. Jane threw herself into the work, grateful for the distraction. She told herself she was not thinking about Nathan, was not wondering what he was doing, was not hoping he might ride by again. But she was lying to herself, and she knew it. 2 weeks after the blizzard, Jane rode into Pueblo for supplies. The town was bustling, full of people catching up after being snowed in. Jane went to the general store, placed her order, and was waiting for it to be filled when she heard a familiar voice. "Jane." She turned, and there was Nathan, standing in the doorway of the store, looking as surprised as she felt. "Nathan," she said, and cursed herself for how breathless she sounded. "What are you doing here?" "Picking up supplies for the ranch," he said, moving toward her. "You?" "Same." They stood there awkwardly, and Jane felt like a schoolgirl with her first crush. It was ridiculous. She was a grown woman, a widow, a rancher. She should not be tongue-tied by the mere presence of a man, but Nathan was not just any man. "How have you been?" he asked. "Good." Busy. The storm caused some damage we are still fixing. You, the same, lost a dozen head in the storm. We have been combing the range looking for survivors. I am sorry. It happens. Nathan paused, then said, I have thought about you. Jane's heart stuttered. You have? Yes. I wanted to ride out to your ranch, check on you, but I thought it might be inappropriate. Why would it be inappropriate? Nathan looked at her, and there was something in his eyes that made her breath catch. Because when I think about you, Jane Phillips, my thoughts are not entirely proper. Jane felt heat rise in her cheeks, but she held his gaze. Maybe I do not want them to be proper. The air between them seemed to crackle. Nathan took a step closer, then seemed to remember where they were. He glanced around the store at the other customers browsing, at the clerk watching them with interest. Have dinner with me, he said quietly. Tonight. There is a restaurant on Main Street. Nothing fancy, but the food is good. Jane knew she should say no. It was too fast, too soon. She barely knew this man, but she heard herself say, yes, I would like that. 6 o'clock, 6 o'clock. Nathan smiled, really smiled, and Jane felt something warm unfurl in her chest. I will see you then. He touched his hat and left, and Jane stood there feeling like the floor had tilted beneath her feet. That evening, Jane wore her best dress, a dark green wool that brought out her eyes. She arranged her brown hair carefully, pinning it up in a style she had not bothered with in years. Samuel watched her preparations with undisguised glee. You look beautiful, Miss Jane, he said. I am just having dinner with a friend, Jane protested. Of course you are. That is why you are glowing like a lantern. Jane ignored him and drove the wagon into town, her stomach fluttering with nerves. She had not been on what could be called a date since she was courting Thomas, and that had been 8 years ago. What did people even talk about on dates? Nathan was waiting outside the restaurant, cleaned up and wearing a pressed shirt under his coat. He smiled when he saw her, and Jane felt her nervousness ease a little. You look lovely, he said. Thank you. You look nice too. He offered his arm and led her inside. The restaurant was small but clean, with checkered tablecloths and candles on each table. Nathan had reserved a table in the corner, away from the main crowd, and they settled in. They ordered food and then talked, the conversation flowing as easily as it had in the cabin during the storm. Jane found herself telling Nathan things she had not told anyone, about her fears for the ranch, her struggles with loneliness, her determination to honor Thomas's memory by making their dream succeed. Nathan listened with complete attention, asking questions, offering observations that showed he understood. In turn, he told her about his life as a foreman, the satisfaction he found in working the land, the respect he had developed for the Ramirez family who employed him. They are good people, he said. They came here from Mexico 30 years ago with nothing, built their ranch from the ground up. They treat their workers fairly, pay well, give a man room to do his job. I am lucky to work for them. Do you ever think about having your own place? Jane asked. Nathan was quiet for a moment. Sometimes, he admitted, but it takes money to start a ranch, and I have spent most of my life saving what I have. Maybe someday. The evening passed too quickly. Jane was startled when the waiter came to tell them the restaurant was closing. She and Nathan had been talking for over 3 hours. Nathan walked her to her wagon, and they stood there in the cold night air, their breath making clouds in the darkness. I enjoyed this, Nathan said. Very much, so did I. Can I see you again? Jane felt joy bubble up inside her. Yes. I would like that. Next week. I have to ride out to the line cabin again, but I will be back by Saturday. Saturday, Jane agreed. Nathan reached out and took her hand, his fingers warm even through her glove. He brought her hand to his lips and kissed it gently, his eyes never leaving hers. Good night, Jane. Good night, Nathan. She drove home in a daze, barely aware of the cold or the darkness. When she got back to the ranch, Samuel took one look at her face and laughed. "That good, was it?" "Oh, Samuel," Jane said, unable to stop smiling. "I think I am in trouble." "Good trouble, I hope. The best kind." Over the next 2 months, Jane and Nathan saw each other whenever they could. He would ride out to her ranch on his days off, and they would spend hours talking, walking the property, just being together. Other times Jane would meet him in town, and they would have dinner or just walk the streets, talking about everything and nothing. Jane felt herself coming alive in ways she had thought were dead forever. Nathan made her laugh, made her think, made her feel seen in a way she had not since Thomas. She knew she was falling in love with him, and the realization terrified and thrilled her in equal measure. She worried, sometimes, that she was betraying Thomas's memory. But when she mentioned it to Samuel, the old man just shook his head. "Mr. Thomas loved you, Miss Jane. He would want you to be happy, and I never seen you as happy as you are with Mr. Foster." "It feels so fast," Jane said. "We have only known each other a few months. Sometimes that is all it takes. Besides, you spent days together in that cabin. That is the kind of time that shows you who a person really is. No pretense, no games. Just two people being real with each other." Jane knew he was right. Those days in the cabin had been like nothing else in her life, a strange intimacy born of circumstance but deepened by genuine connection. She knew Nathan in ways that went beyond the superficial, and he knew her the same way. One Saturday in early May, Nathan rode out to the ranch looking serious. Jane felt her stomach drop when she saw his expression. "What is wrong?" she asked. "Nothing is wrong," Nathan said, dismounting. "But I need to talk to you." They walked away from the house, out to the pasture where wildflowers were beginning to bloom. Nathan was quiet, his hands shoved in his pockets, and Jane felt anxiety building in her chest. "Are you ending this?" she asked finally, unable to stand the suspense. "Because if you are, just say it. Do not draw it out." Nathan looked at her, startled. "Ending it? Jane, no, why would you think that?" "Because you look like you are about to say something terrible." Nathan laughed, the tension breaking. "I am terrible at this," he muttered. Then he took her hands in his and looked into her eyes. "Jane Phillips, I have been in love with you since I found you in that blizzard. Maybe even before, in those days in the cabin when you were so fierce and brave and real. I know it has not been long, and I know you might need more time. But I cannot keep this to myself anymore. I love you. I want to marry you if you will have me." Jane felt tears spring to her eyes. "Nathan," she whispered. "I know your ranch is important to you," he continued, the words tumbling out now. "I would never ask you to give it up. I have some money saved. We could combine our resources, build something bigger, or I could work your ranch and give up the foreman job. I do not care as long as I am with you." "Nathan," Jane said again, and this time she was laughing and crying at once. "Yes," he blinked. "Yes. Yes, I will marry you. I love you too. I have been afraid to say it, afraid it was too soon, afraid of what it meant. But I do. I love you." Nathan let out a whoop and picked her up, spinning her around. When he set her down, he kissed her, long and deep and full of promise. Jane kissed him back, feeling joy and desire and hope all tangled together in her chest. When they finally broke apart, both breathless, Nathan rested his forehead against hers. "You have made me the happiest man alive," he said. "Good," Jane replied. "That is my intention." They walked back to the house hand in hand, and Samuel took one look at them and grinned. "About time," he said. They were married a month later, in June, in a simple ceremony at the church in Pueblo. Samuel gave Jane away, and the Ramirez family came, along with Jane's ranch hands and several of Nathan's friends from the cattle business. It was small and intimate and perfect. After the ceremony, they had a party at Jane's ranch. Well, their ranch now, Jane thought with a thrill. Nathan had given notice to the Ramirez family, who had been understanding and generous, giving him a bonus for his years of loyal service. He had moved his things to Jane's house, and they were combining their lives and their resources. That night, after the guests had left and it was just the two of them, Nathan carried Jane over the threshold of their bedroom. He set her down gently and looked at her, his blue eyes dark with desire and love. "I love you, Mrs. Foster," he said. "I love you too, Mr. Foster," Jane replied, and drew him down into a kiss. Making love with Nathan was nothing like it had been with Thomas, and Jane felt a momentary guilt for the comparison before Nathan drove all thoughts from her mind. He was gentle but passionate, attentive to her needs, and Jane gave herself over to sensation and emotion in ways she had not known she could. Afterward, lying in his arms, Jane felt complete for the first time in years. She traced patterns on Nathan's chest and thought about the strange chain of events that had brought them together. "I was so angry at myself that day," she said quietly, "for going out despite the warnings, for getting lost, for needing to be rescued." "Do not be," Nathan said, his hand stroking her hair. "If you had not gotten lost, I would never have found you. And I was lost too, Jane, in my own way, lost to loneliness and routine. You saved me just as much as I saved you." "You are never lost with me," Jane quoted, remembering his words from that day. "Never," Nathan confirmed. "You are my true north now." They spent the summer building their life together. Nathan proved to be exactly the partner Jane needed, strong enough to handle the heavy work but secure enough to let her make decisions and take the lead when necessary. They worked side by side, combining their herds and expanding the operation. By fall, they had nearly 400 head of cattle and had hired 2 more ranch hands to help with the work. Samuel had taken to Nathan immediately, and the 2 men often sat on the porch in the evenings, smoking pipes and talking about the old days. Jane would watch them from the window, feeling a contentment so deep it was almost frightening. In October, Jane realized she was pregnant. She told Nathan one evening after supper, suddenly nervous about his reaction. They had not talked about children, had been too caught up in building their life together. "A baby," Nathan said, his face unreadable. "Yes, are you happy?" "Happy." Nathan stood and pulled her into his arms, holding her so tightly she could barely breathe. "Jane, I am beyond happy. I am ecstatic, I am terrified, I am everything at once." Jane laughed, relief flooding through her. "Me too." Nathan pulled back to look at her, his hand going to her still flat stomach. "A child," he said wonderingly. Our child," Jane confirmed. The baby was born in late May, during a thunderstorm that rattled the windows and made Jane think of the blizzard that had brought her and Nathan together. The labor was long and hard, but Nathan stayed with her the whole time, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, whispering encouragement. When the baby finally came, a lusty, squalling boy with dark hair and blue eyes like his father, Jane felt tears of joy streaming down her face. "A son," Nathan said, his voice choked with emotion. "Jane, we have a son." They named him Thomas after Jane's first husband. Nathan had suggested it, and Jane had loved him even more for the generosity and understanding the gesture showed. "He is part of your story," Nathan had said. "Part of what made you who you are. Our son should carry his name." Little Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong. Jane had worried she would not know how to be a mother, but the skills came naturally. Nathan was a devoted father, often taking the baby from her at night so she could sleep, walking the floor with his son when Thomas fussed. Samuel doted on the baby, and the ranch hands treated him like a little prince. Their home was full of love and laughter in ways Jane had never dared to hope for after Thomas died. 2 years later, Jane gave birth to a daughter they named Sarah, after Nathan's mother. Sarah was the image of Jane, with brown hair and green eyes and a stubborn streak that made Nathan laugh. "She is you," he would say when Sarah refused to give up on something. "Fierce and determined." "She is us," Jane would correct. "The best parts of both." The ranch continued to prosper. They expanded their land holdings, buying out a neighbor who decided to retire back east. They built a new, larger house to accommodate their growing family, though they kept the original house for Samuel, who insisted he was too old to change his ways. Nathan's experience and Jane's business sense proved to be a perfect combination. They developed a reputation for quality cattle and fair dealing, and buyers came from as far as Denver to purchase their stock. On their 5th anniversary, Nathan surprised Jane with a trip to Denver. They left the children with Samuel and the ranch hands and took the train to the city. It was Jane's first time away from the ranch since they married, and she felt strange being in a city again after so long. They stayed in a nice hotel, ate at restaurants, saw a show. It was wonderful, but by the 3rd day Jane found herself homesick for the ranch, for the wide open spaces and the honest work. "I have become a country woman," she told Nathan over dinner. "I never thought that would happen." "You were always a country woman," Nathan said. "You just did not know it yet." On the train ride home, Jane rested her head on Nathan's shoulder and thought about the journey that had brought her here. A blizzard, a stranger, a cabin in the storm. Such small things to build a life on, and yet they had built an incredible life. "What are you thinking?" Nathan asked. "About that day," Jane said, "when you found me in the storm." "I think about it often," Nathan admitted. "How easily I could have missed you. I almost did not ride out that direction. Something made me change my course at the last minute." "Fate," Jane said. "Luck," Nathan countered. "Love," Jane decided. Nathan smiled and kissed the top of her head. "Yes, love." Over the years, their family continued to grow. Jane gave birth to 2 more children. Another boy they named Samuel after their beloved friend, and finally another daughter they named Elizabeth. The ranch house was always full of noise and activity, with children running through the rooms and ranch hands coming and going. Samuel lived to see all 4 of Jane's children born, passing away peacefully in his sleep when little Elizabeth was 2. They buried him on a hill overlooking the ranch, where he could watch over the land he had helped build. Jane grieved deeply for the old man who had been her rock through so much. "He loved you like a daughter," Nathan told her as they stood by the grave. "He was so proud of everything you accomplished." "We accomplished," Jane corrected. "I could not have done any of it without you, Nathan. Without Samuel. Without everyone who believed in me when I did not believe in myself." As the children grew, they each found their place on the ranch. Thomas, the eldest, took to the cattle business naturally and would often ride out with Nathan to check the herd. Sarah was more interested in the business side, learning bookkeeping and helping Jane manage the finances. Samuel, always the dreamer, loved the horses and became an expert at training and breeding. Elizabeth, the youngest, was still finding her way but showed promise in everything she tried. On a spring day 20 years after Nathan had found Jane in the blizzard, they stood on the porch of their home, watching their children work in the yard. Thomas was now a young man of 19, already courting a girl from town. Sarah was 17 and fierce, with her mother's determination and her father's steady calm. Samuel was 15 and rarely seen without a horse nearby. Elizabeth was 12 and full of mischief. "We did well," Jane said, taking Nathan's hand. "We did," Nathan agreed. His hair was completely gray now, and there were deep lines around his eyes, but to Jane he was as handsome as the day he had ridden out of the storm to save her. "You ever regret it?" she asked. Giving up your foreman job, tying yourself to me and this ranch." Nathan looked at her, and his blue eyes were as clear and certain as they had been that first day. "Not once," he said. "You gave me a home, Jane, a family, a life worth living. How could I regret that?" "I was so lost," Jane murmured, "before you found me." "So was I," Nathan said. "But you are never lost with me, remember. And I am never lost with you." Jane leaned into him, feeling his arm come around her shoulders. She thought about the girl she had been, widowed and alone, stubbornly checking her cattle in a storm. She thought about the man who had appeared out of the snow like an answer to a prayer she had not known she was saying. Sometimes life surprised you. Sometimes a blizzard and a stranger could change everything. Sometimes getting lost was exactly what you needed to find your way home. Thomas came running up to the porch, breathless and excited. "Pa, one of the mares is foaling. Samuel thinks you should come look." "I will be right there," Nathan said, then turned to Jane. "Coming." "Always," Jane said, and followed her husband down into the yard, into the life they had built together from snow and hope and love. Years continued to pass in the way they do on a ranch, marked by seasons and births and the constant rhythm of work. Jane and Nathan grew older together, their love deepening with time rather than fading. They were each other's best friend, partner, and confidant. When Thomas announced he was marrying the girl from town, a sweet young woman named Emma, Jane and Nathan threw a big celebration at the ranch. It was satisfying to see their son so happy, so settled in his purpose. He would take over the ranch one day, Nathan and Jane knew, and he would run it well. Sarah surprised everyone by announcing she wanted to go to college in Denver. Jane had been shocked at first, worried about her daughter so far away, but Nathan had been supportive. "Let her fly," he had said. "She has your spirit, Jane. She needs to see what is out there before she decides what she wants." So Sarah went, and she thrived, studying business and coming home with ideas about efficiency and modern ranching techniques that made Nathan shake his head in amazement. "The world is changing," Sarah would say. "We have to change with it." Samuel took over the breeding program, developing a line of horses that became renowned throughout Colorado. He was quieter than his siblings, more introspective, but brilliant in his own way. Elizabeth grew into a beautiful young woman with her mother's green eyes and a kind heart. She was the one who brought home strays, who nursed injured animals back to health, who could not stand to see anything suffer. She ended up marrying the young veterinarian who came through Pueblo, and they settled on a small place not far from the main ranch. Nathan and Jane became grandparents, first to Thomas and Emma's children, then to Elizabeth's. They delighted in the new generation, teaching them to ride, telling them stories, passing on the history of the family and the ranch. On their 30th anniversary, their children threw them a party. The house was packed with family and friends, neighbors and business associates. There was music and dancing and more food than Jane had ever seen in one place. Late in the evening, Nathan pulled Jane outside, away from the crowd. They walked out to the pasture, under a sky brilliant with stars. "Tired?" Nathan asked. "A little," Jane admitted, "but happy tired, good tired." "We have been blessed," Nathan said, "more than I ever thought possible." "I never imagined this," Jane said, gesturing at the house full of light and laughter. "When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I thought I would just work until I died, honoring his memory but never really living." "And then you rode out into a blizzard," Nathan said with a smile. "And then I rode out into a blizzard," Jane agreed, laughing, "and got hopelessly lost, and I found you. You did." Jane took his hands in hers. "Nathan Foster, finding you was the greatest gift of my life. You gave me everything. Love, family, partnership, purpose. You gave me a reason to live fully again." "You gave me the same," Nathan said. I was just going through the motions before you. Working, sleeping, working again. You made me remember what it was to really be alive." They stood there holding each other, two people who had been strangers brought together by chance and storm, who had built something beautiful from that chance meeting. As they grew older, Nathan and Jane gradually stepped back from the day-to-day running of the ranch. Thomas took over more responsibility, with Sarah's business acumen guiding major decisions. Nathan still rode out most days, unable to give up the habit of a lifetime, but the rides were shorter and slower. Jane's hands developed arthritis that made some tasks difficult, but she refused to complain. She kept the books as long as she could, then taught Sarah everything she knew so the transition would be smooth. They were sitting on the porch one evening, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and red when Nathan said, "I have been thinking." "About what?" Jane asked. "About that cabin." "My old line cabin where I took you during the storm. It is still there, you know. The Ramirez family has no use for it anymore. They have offered to sell it to me for almost nothing." "Why would you want it?" Nathan was quiet for a moment. "Because that is where we began," he said finally. "Where you stopped being just a woman I saved and became Jane, the person I could not imagine living without. I thought maybe we could fix it up, keep it as a retreat, somewhere to go when we want to remember." Jane felt tears prick her eyes. Even after all these years, Nathan could surprise her with his romantic gestures. "I think that is a wonderful idea." They bought the cabin and spent the summer fixing it up, making it comfortable but keeping its essential character. When it was done, they would sometimes ride out there together, spending a night or two in the simple space, talking and laughing and remembering. On one such trip, when Jane was 62 and Nathan 67, they lay in the narrow bunk together, listening to the wind howl outside. "Sounds like a blizzard," Jane observed. "It does," Nathan agreed, "but we are safe and warm. Because you know exactly where we are." "I always know where we are," Nathan said, echoing his words from so long ago. "You are never lost with me." Jane turned in his arms to face him. His face was deeply lined now, his body not as strong as it once was, but he was still her Nathan, still the man who had ridden out of a storm to save her life. "And you are never lost with me," she said. "We found each other, Nathan. Against all odds, in the middle of a blizzard, we found each other." "Best thing I ever did," Nathan said and kissed her gently. They had 14 more good years together, years of watching their grandchildren grow, of seeing the ranch continue to prosper under Thomas's management, of enjoying the fruits of a lifetime of hard work. They traveled a little, though never far or for long. Their home was where they wanted to be. Nathan passed away peacefully in his sleep at age 81, with Jane holding his hand. She grieved deeply but found comfort in their children and grandchildren, in the legacy they had built together. She kept the wedding band on her finger but did not feel widowed the way she had when Thomas died. She had been blessed with two great loves in her life, had lived fully and without regret. Jane lived another 5 years after Nathan died, staying active and engaged with the ranch until the very end. On a spring morning, sitting on the porch she had shared with Nathan for so many years, looking out at the land they had loved, she simply closed her eyes and did not open them again. They buried her next to Nathan on the hill overlooking the ranch, where they could watch over the family and the land together. At the funeral, Thomas stood with his arm around his own son, now grown, and told the story of how his parents had met. "My mother was lost in a blizzard," he said. "And my father found her. He said, 'You are never lost with me,' and she never was. They spent 56 years together, and in all that time they never lost each other. That is the legacy they left us. Not just this ranch, not just their success, but the knowledge that love, real love, is about finding someone and never letting them be lost again. The grandchildren grew up hearing the story, and they told it to their children. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through generations, and the cabin where it had all began was preserved as a family treasure, a place where the love of Nathan and Jane Foster had first taken root. And on winter nights, when the wind howled down from the mountains and snow fell thick and fast, the children of the family would huddle by the fire and hear again the tale of the widow lost in the blizzard and the cowboy who found her. And they would understand that sometimes the worst storms bring the greatest blessings, and that true love is never really lost, but lives on in the hearts and lives of those it touched. The ranch thrived for generations, a testament to what two people could build when they found each other against all odds. And somewhere in the hills above Pueblo, Colorado, two graves stood side by side, the headstones reading simply, Nathan Foster, 1847–1928, and Jane Phillips Foster, 1852–1933, beloved partners in life and love. You are never lost with me.